Compared to many other industries, electricity generation, transmission and distribution across New Zealand is a high-risk work environment. No matter how long you may have been working in the industry, it's important to remain attentive to potential sources of harm to yourself and those around you. The most important of these are critical risks. These are risks that have the potential to cause death, serious injury, or major illness. Staylive has identified a number of critical risks which are common across the industry and provides best practice guidance on managing these risks. Our common critical industry risks are driving, hazardous substances and materials, including asbestos, working at height, including dropped objects, mobile plant and equipment, stored energy, electricity, confined space, working around water, and mental health. Specific risks and how we plan to manage them are communicated in different ways. These include risk registers, bow tie diagrams, hazard boards, and work in progress boards. Be aware that these can look quite different between locations and you may notice the use of different terms, but essentially they provide the information you need to know. If you're not sure about what something means, then check with your supervisor or site representative. A hazard is a situation or thing that has the potential to harm a person. Risk is the possibility that harm, for example death, injury or illness, might occur when exposed to the hazard. As an example, consider the requirement for work in a confined space. This type of work presents many hazards which include hazardous atmospheres, engulfment and asphyxiation from dust or contaminants. These hazards pose significant risks to the health and safety of workers. We can manage exposure to the risk by implementing effective controls. Confined space atmospheres can be tested for hazardous conditions. Specialist personal protective equipment, PPE, could include items such as respiratory protective equipment, safety harness and lifeline. Safety stand by people, also known as hull watch, can be included in the procedure with a reliable system of communication between parties in place. A confined space entry certificate is a written work authority and can be utilised to provide a safety checklist as well as clearly defining emergency response requirements. A second example would be working in the vicinity of a live conductor. The safe distance or minimum approach distance you or a structure you are connected to can be from a live conductor depending on the line voltage. Make sure to ask those you are working with how the safe distance has been determined, or better still if the source can be de-energised. The distance between any live overhead electric line and any part of any mobile plant or load carried shall be 4 metres unless the operator has received written consent from the overhead line owner allowing a reduced distance. Whatever format is used to warn of hazards and risks, it's important that you understand all potential sources of harm and that you feel confident in the critical controls required to manage the risk. Health and safety at work regulation describes a hierarchy or order of controls that can be worked through until a risk is removed or adequately minimised. The controls at the top of the hierarchy are the most effective, the controls at the bottom the least effective. The most effective risk control is elimination of the risk entirely. An example would be to use a remotely piloted vehicle to access a potentially dangerous place, instead of sending in a worker. If elimination is not possible, one or more other types of controls must be applied. Substitution. Can the source of the risk be replaced with something that presents a lower risk? An example would be the use of a harmless substance in place of one with a potential for serious damage to health if you were to be exposed. Isolation. Can the hazard be isolated in a way that prevents people coming into contact with it? For example, removal of the source of energy or by the physical exclusion of people from an area using suitable barriers or covers. Engineering. Can physical controls be applied to minimise the risk? An example would be the use of ventilation systems to remove harmful emissions, and where possible, this should be considered during the design or upgrade of our assets. Administrative controls are processes and procedures that are put in place that minimise the hazard. Examples of administrative controls are training and competency requirements, worksite safety plan, permits and signage. If, after all of the previous control options have been considered and/or implemented and risk still remains, personal protective equipment, or PPE, must be provided and its use enforced. This is effectively the last line of defence. Multiple risks can have shared or common critical controls. A robust process that ensures these controls are effective will manage multiple critical risks. Staylive has identified common critical controls as work control procedures, training and competence, and PPE. As these controls manage a large number of risks, making sure that they are understood and implemented is critical to keeping you safe. Identification of the presence of critical risks at your work location may be shown on work in progress or temporary hazard boards and displayed as you enter the site. These controls may be visually displayed as you move around our sites, and it's important to look out for changing requirements as you move throughout a site or area. Signs may highlight the requirement for specific PPE to be worn. PPE is site-specific and often depends on the location you are visiting and the task you are undertaking. Signage may also identify an area as authorised for entry under specific conditions, for example, a permit. You are permitted to enter a permit area under direct supervision of a trained and competent member of the work party. You will be required to sign onto the permit on entry and off when your visit is complete. Prior to starting work, we will ask you to complete a risk assessment that identifies for us the types of hazards your task, equipment, or work methods may present to you and other workers. How detailed this is should reflect the scope, complexity, and risk of the work. There may be others who are impacted by the risk or may be able to contribute to managing the risk. It's important to consult, cooperate, and communicate with others to manage the risk as effectively as possible.